I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Todd Cherches is the CEO and co-founder of BigBlueGumball, an innovative New York City-based consulting firm specializing in leadership development, management training, public speaking, and executive coaching. Creator of the patented visual leadership methodology, Todd is a TEDx speaker, as well as a 3-time award-winning Adjunct Professor of Leadership at New York University and a lecturer on leadership at Columbia University. He is also the author of Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. This book was published a couple of years ago in 2020. And Todd, I got it today in the mail. I literally got it right before we came into the studio here. So I look forward to cracking that bear and reading it. So listen, I'm thrilled you're here. I was so excited when you responded via email, said you'd come. I've been tracking you for a while. Thank you so much and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It's great being here with you.
Well, listen, a rich background. The intro I took right off your website and tweaked it a little bit. Doesn't do you justice. What more do we need to know about Todd? Tell the audience who they're about to listen to.
Sure. Well, because I'm an executive coach and I do management leadership, consulting, training, and coaching, people assume, oh, you must have had a business background. But my background was in English literature with concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. So, and then my dream was to work in the TV industry. And I talk about that in my TEDx talk on the power of visual thinking, where I say that, at age 5, people would say, Todd, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I want to be Superman. And they say, all right, that's great. But if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan? And I said, all right, then Batman. So those were my 2 career aspirations from childhood. And then once reality set in and I realized, I had to try to figure out a way to become a different kind of superhero. I love television. I was one of those baby boomer TV addicts. So I decided I wanted to go into the TV industry. So everything I did was geared towards that. So I got my bachelor's degree in English literature, my master's in communication. And then after working in advertising in New York for a year, I moved out to LA and I worked in a number of jobs in the TV industry, including my first job was working for Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, who just passed away recently. Baby boomers know him. My millennial students have no idea who I'm talking about. Yeah. And then I worked for Aaron Spelling on Dynasty, just putting scripts together. And then I was in casting at Columbia Pictures, comedy at Disney, and drama at CBS. So those were my years in the TV industry. And the one recurring theme early in my career was horrible bosses, toxic cultures, and bad bosses. So that's kind of what drove me into leadership, because I was a project manager in the theme park business for a few years, and then I moved back to New York, and I ended up with a job at a management training company, and that's where I took a deep dive into management leadership books, and the light bulb went off, and I'm like, this is an art and a science. It's something that could be learned. It's something that could be taught. So most people manage and lead the way they were managed and led, which is through tyranny and abuse and saying, I told you to do this and do it my way or the highway. It's like, that's the kind of manager I always had. And leadership is a completely different thing. So I had never experienced leadership before. And then, so that's why it was so eye-opening when I discovered what leadership was all about and how it's different from management. So I'm sure with your background in the Marine Corps, you've experienced both good and bad management and leadership in your life.
I have, I got 24 years in the Marine Corps, 15 years as an executive in a publicly traded company. So, I like to say I've seen it all. I don't know if I've seen it all, but I've seen enough on both ends of the bell curve, good and bad. And my experience has been the same as yours. And I'd like to ask you this. I always tell people being with the bad leader was not a good place to be, but if you reflected, it was often a good place to be from, because I learned often as much from the bad leaders as the good ones. Now, unfortunately, from the bad ones, it was, man, if I ever get in charge, I'll never do this. I'll never say that. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you raised all kinds of issues in that comment. Well, first of all, my book is dedicated first to my wife, secondly to my parents, and thirdly to all the horrible bosses without whom my career would not have been possible. So that's literally the dedication at the front of my book. And I agree 100% with the bell curve. And in fact, I mentioned that in one of the chapters. I had about 5% really horrible bosses, 5% great. Then maybe somewhere in the middle, some not so good and some good, and then most were somewhere in the middle. So it definitely was a bell curve, and I did learn a lot of lessons. It's painful when you're going through it and you're on the receiving end, but yeah, you learn how to do it. Now, one of my bosses, I actually confronted her, and because I was having a nervous breakdown. She was creating so much stress and anxiety. And I thought maybe if I talked to her, we could fix this relationship. And then she said, basically her response to me after listening for like 2 minutes was, quit whining, get back to work. When I had your job, I was treated like crap, and now it's your turn. And if you don't like it, I can replace you tomorrow. So it's like, okay, that didn't go exactly as I was hoping, So, but when you have that, it's like, what do you do with it other than try to survive and then learn from it and say, I won't do any of these things that are being done to me. And my classic story that's in my book, and I publish it every Valentine's Day, my blog post, A Love Letter to Horrible Bosses. I tell the story about the boss who threw a box of pens at my head because they were not the ones she wanted. She wanted the fine point. These were the medium point. And instead of just giving me that feedback, I was literally sitting at my desk and I felt something whip by my head and break open. And she literally threw a box of 12 Papermate pens at me. They just started screaming at me about my incompetence because I couldn't even order her a box of pens. So like when you have that kind of management, it's still, even to this day, if I see someone coming towards me with a box of pens, I flinch. So that does not go away even 25, 30 years later.
So suffice it to say, you avoid that aisle in Office Depot.
Oh, yeah. I stay away from stationery stores.
I love it. Well, listen, I wanted to ask your thoughts on this. You're highly experienced, and I know you've got insights to share. As you know, I'm an executive coach, and I often coach men and women who are just recently or are about to be elevated from, say, the director VP level to now SVP or an executive, a full out, as their company defines it, a member of the executive team. And I'm sure your experience is the same as my observations is, sometimes a really good, effective, dynamic director flounders at the next level. They just can't seem to make, or they have great difficulties making that hard to define. It's hard for me anyway, Todd, to define what's the difference, just one level up, What are your thoughts on what's it take, in general, generalization here of what's it take to go from, say, a director level VP to the senior ranks now, the executive ranks?
Yeah, it's such a complicated question. As you were talking, I mentioned I majored in English literature. Shakespeare said, "Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown." Right. So if you think about that, why is that? In this expression, it's lonely at the top. The higher up you go on the pyramid, it gets narrower and narrower. There are fewer people that you can rely on. There are few people you could trust. I know a lot of people who are great number twos or number threes, but just not great number ones. And I was that way for a very long time. I love being the right-hand person to the person at the top, but I never felt that I was capable of being at the top of that pyramid. There's a lot of thoughts behind this. I mean, imposter syndrome is a very common phrase these days for a reason. People feel like, who am I to be leading? Who am I to be at the top of this pyramid? So when you're at the VP or director level, there's some layers of protection there. Once you're at the C-suite, you're exposed. Like everything is out in the open. So you need to be transparent. You can only fake your way so far. And one of the books on the shelf behind me is Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is one of my all-time favorite leadership books. So what got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. And his subtitle is Discover the 20 Workplace Habits You Need to Break. And a lot of leaders are effective and successful, not because of how they are, but in spite of how they are. But once you get into that C-suite level, I think you're really exposed. I think those fatal flaws really, you can't hide them or sweep them under the rug anymore because you have all eyes looking at you. So those are just, as you were asking that question, those are just a few of the thoughts that popped into my head.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for that, Todd. I want to branch off on that a little bit. It's kind of implied, but I'd like to discuss it. I've always told people, the executives that are about to promote someone, hey, this sounds like a stupid question, but have you asked her if she has a desire to be promoted to the executive level? And unfortunately, more often than not, they haven't. They just assumed, well, who wouldn't want to be a C-level something, And so that's the first issue I'd like you to address. The second one is the individual themselves. I always ask them, have you contemplated, have you really reflected on, have you talked to other people at the C-level, like what you're about to step into? Are you sure? Or there's going to be a lot of learning and maybe some buffeting a little bit. And to your point, Todd, you're no longer at the side of the table. You're the big guy or the big gal right now, Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. In my NYU class, it's leadership and team building for HR professionals, everyone in HR is always striving to get that seat at the table, that coveted seat at the table. Or I was thinking about Hamilton, you want to be in the room where it happens, right? So if you think about that song. So yeah, one is, do you want it? And two, be careful what you ask for. Because once you get there, a lot of times, like you said, if you've not talked to people who've been in that seat, and because it's very easy to look at it from down below and say, oh, I could do that, or that's so easy, or why don't they just do this? We always see people questioning senior leaders saying, oh, if I was in that seat, I would do this. But it's not that easy once you're in that seat, right? So it seems very obvious. If you watch sports, if you watch a football game, and you say, why did they do that? Why didn't they call timeout? Or why did they go for the field goal and not the, whatever? It's like they have other information. They have another vantage point. And that kind of relates to my visual leadership approach. Is the lens through which you see the world differs from person to person. We all don't see things through the same lens. And it's a very different vantage point when you're looking at things from the very top. And I think that's a great point that you raised, that sometimes people are promoted before they're really ready. And there's, the Peter principle, which is people are promoted to the level of their incompetence. You keep being promoted up until you fail. So a lot of people are set up for failure, basically, if they're not psychologically and emotionally ready to take on those kinds of strategic roles.
Yeah, well said. I want to switch directions now and talk about something that I know you've been exposed to, we've all been exposed to it, and that's the pandemic. We have had in corporate America really to adapt in many ways, and in no small way, the leadership styles, leadership tactics and techniques. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what have the successful leaders, we all got blindsided with the gut punch early a couple of years ago, and everybody was down on the canvas for a little bit. And then very quickly, I think the adaptive, resilient people got up and they started trying stuff. They said, it is what it is. We're going to deal with it. And of that crew, many of them, I think, really figured it out and are doing well. So what did you see that people did well? And where do you think it's going in the future? How has the pandemic changed leadership, if it has changed going forward?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has changed everything. I know a lot of leaders who've had their head in the sand for a while and are just kind of like waiting it out and saying, okay, let's turn the calendar back to 2019 and forget this all ever happened. But I use a lot of visual metaphors. So it's like, the train's left the station, the genie's out of the bottle, and the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? There's no stuffing it back in. There's people who have been just going along doing what they've been doing for many years. And then the pandemic basically was a pause button, or, it's the great resignation, but it's also the great reassessment, the great reset. I think people just looked at their lives through a fresh lens and said, now that I had a chance to pause and reflect, do I want to go back to that? Real life example, one of my colleagues is a very senior person at the company who was commuting 2 hours each way to get to and from work. So it was 4 hours a day. And he missed many of his kids' baseball games or ballet recitals or whatever. And he said, why do I want to spend 4 hours a day going to and from an office where I could just go 3 minutes from my bedroom to my home office and maybe go in once in a while? But do I need to do that? I want to get off that hamster wheel. I'm not going. And other people who flew all over the country, do they want to fly from New York to LA for a 1 hour meeting anymore? I don't think. Some people may. Some people can't wait to get back to the office. They can't wait to get on the road again. Not to sound like Willie Nelson, but but other people, the world has changed, their lives have changed, their priorities have changed. And I think leaders who haven't changed or recognize that the changes and what people want and need, they're going to be in for a rude awakening when people start resigning or jumping ship to go to a competitor who is offering them more freedom and flexibility.
Yeah, great insights. I want to ask you related to that. Obviously, it's relatively easy. It's very easy for a leader who is in the same office as his or her charges, and they can have a quick meeting or a formal meeting once a week or whatever. Any guidance or thoughts on leadership? That's not possible in some cases anymore. They've sold their real estate. They are remote, and some companies are totally some of them are mostly remote. Any tips for leaders of how to accomplish that? How to keep team cohesion and motivation and inspiration, despite the fact they're kind of all looking at you on a Zoom screen?
Yeah, it's like herding cats, right? Not knowing, is this the day that Mike is in the office? No, he's only on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and this is a Tuesday, right? So it's like, there's certain basic things like, let's say MBWA, managing by walking around, right? In the past, a manager can walk up and down the halls or stop by a different floor and say, hey, how's your day going? Or pop into my office and let's chat. If your people are not there in the office, it's very hard to do that. So then you have to schedule a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams call. So that's not there. If you're a new employee, that's one of the biggest challenges. I know someone who changed jobs 3 times over the last 2 years. He's never met a single colleague in person, right? Or worn pants, right? So it's like your job changes, your company changes, yet you haven't left your living room, right? So what's the impact of that? Especially, it's very hard. I know a few people whose children are recent college graduates. How do you get onboarded to culture of the workforce and what it's like to work with colleagues? I think back to earlier in my career, if you didn't know something, you turn to the person sitting next to you at the next cubicle and just say, hey, I'm stuck here for a second. But if you've never met anyone, how do you do that? What's the equivalent of that? So I was teaching in person at NYU for 11 years. And then in mid-semester of spring of 2020, we immediately switched to Zoom because of the pandemic. And I had to figure out, how do I continue to teach, build my relationships with my students, and do experiential interactive learning online on Zoom? So I had to quickly figure out a way to, not to overuse the word pivot, but to achieve the objectives, but under different circumstances. I think that's what leaders need to do, is say, what did I used to do? What would I like to do? But I can't do that. What's the equivalent of that? How do I achieve that same objective, whether it's building collaboration or teamwork or camaraderie and morale, but doing that virtually? And there are ways to do that. A lot of people haven't figured that out yet. So that's one of the things, that's one of the centers of my coaching practice and my management and leadership training these days, is helping leaders to navigate that. We could talk about, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that as well. But those are some of the main things that I'm working with my clients on, is how do I achieve all of what we need to and what we used to, but under the new circumstances.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Todd. It mirrors a lot of my experiences and or challenges that I don't have any real answers for. I'm observing people, what they're doing. So in no particular order, I have observed some people doing it really well. To your point about, stop by my office and let's chat. I know a leader she was very astute and realized they can't do that anymore. So she took it upon herself to tell them, listen, you know how I am. I always walked around the office. I love chatting with you people. I talk to most of you at least every other day. And if you don't mind, I am going to schedule a 10-minute meeting with you once a week. And I don't want to talk about business. I just want to talk to you. Yeah. It can be at your convenience. It can be while you're in the gym doing cardio. It can be whatever. And her people loved it. They absolutely loved it. She also scheduled a Zoom call, just like we're on. And she said, if you want to just pop in and we can talk about anything business, I will always be on Zoom Thursday mornings from 7 to 7:30. I'm there, I'm drinking coffee, I'm doing work. And if you pop in and you got something you want to talk to me about, fine. Now, she had formally scheduled meetings with her teams as a team and individuals, but she was ad-libbing as well. Yeah. People responded very, very well to it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I love both of those. I mean, that's, to me, one of the key topics I always talk about is the distinctions between management and leadership, right? You manage processes, you lead people. And that's a great example of leadership because it's very people focused. I love the idea of scheduling regular times because that's what I do with my NYU students. I made sure every semester I blocked out a 45-minute slot that was theirs. They could schedule at any time just to talk to me about anything. It wasn't about my grade or, how can I get better grades? It was career coaching. It was advice on things. It was pulling back the curtain. So it's really their agenda, whatever they wanted to talk about. So I love that idea for managers to say, this is your agenda. We're not going to talk about clients and work. We're going to talk about you and anything you want to talk about. So I love that. And I also love the quote office hours kind of open Zoom room policy of pop in. Let's pop in and let's chat. And you can even have people go off into a breakout room if someone else. So it's almost the equivalent of popping into the break room at your office, right? You know how people pop in and then pull over to a table, in the corner and kind of have a little chat. So anytime you can replicate that, what's great about that, you can do that globally because very often the people, and there's something called proximity bias. The people physically closer to the bosses it's like out of sight, out of mind if you're seen, if you're visible. So it kind of levels the playing field, right? So if you're located in a different office, and I hadn't thought about this in years, I used to be the head of the New York office of a Denver-based web design company just for a few months, and it didn't work out. That's a longer story. But so often they would have a meeting in Denver where they just go into the conference room and say, let's chat about something. And I'd not hear about it. And then a week later, they'd say, oh, we talked about that in the meeting last week. I'm like, here I am in New York with, by myself. No one invited me to that meeting. I had no idea. But I know what it's like to be on the, talk about diversity and inclusion. This was exclusion, right? Let's leave out the New York guy. So yeah, I think that's it. With leaders, you have to have a heightened sense of awareness, empathy, compassion, understanding, looking at things from other people's, not alienating people, not leaving people out. So I think it takes a heightened sense of awareness and intuition to really realize, all right, what's the impact on people. But so I love that person, the woman that you were talking about, those are some great leadership activities that could really help to achieve those objectives.
Yeah. And thank you. I had another one that I want to share with you and with the audience. And this is more along the lines of building culture and setting the tone of culture. And this company, one of their core values was, we're going to have fun. Well, everybody says we're going to have fun, but one of their core values was we work hard, blah, blah, blah. But somewhere in there is we're going to have a fun environment. So this leader was a boomer, and he was a very formal guy, straight-laced guy, still wore, laced up shoes and all of that. He was what we would call, a traditional Wall Street guy. Well, when Zoom started, the pandemic started, he had a really good right-hand gal who advised him, look, just trust me on this, just try it one time. Let's every other Friday, let's do something neat with the team. So the first Friday, it's, hey, those of you that are embarrassed, your dog was barking on last week's meeting, you know what? Next week, we want to see your dog. Mm-hmm. We want everybody we're going to start this meeting and everybody gets 1 minute with their dog or cat or fish or whatever. And she said, the guy said, you really think they'll like that? And she said, let's try. Yeah. It went wild. I mean, it was incredible. They got emails like, that was the best meeting. And so it brought them closer. And then a couple of weeks later, the theme was, you've got 1 minute and you have to share your screen and you have to show the 3 most embarrassing childhood pictures you've got. Huh. So, guys were, showing pictures of them being a pudgy little Boy Scout, or a girl would be in ballet class or whatever. And again, the crowd loved it, and so it was just theme after theme like that. And it cost them an hour of week. But she and he both told me that the team building, cohesion and goodwill that resulted from that. She said, if Mike, and in some ways, we don't want to come back in the office because how would we replicate that, if everybody was there? So any thoughts on that technique?
Yeah, a number of them. Yeah, first of all, I love that. One of my mottos when I do team building is that team bonding needs to come before team building, and that we need to connect to each other if we want to work better with each other. So those are 2 of my mantras. So team bonding, there's a saying, wearing the same shirts doesn't make you a team. And we've seen that in sports. We've seen that in everything. Just slapping a logo on someone doesn't make you a team member. You really need to create that bond. Teams have to go through the Tuckman stages of forming, storming, norming, and performing, right? You need to, and during the forming stage, you really want to connect and learn about each other. And so I love the bring your dog to work thing, or bring your child to work. I've done similar activities where I've used them as icebreakers. Find something in your office that is either makes you smile or laugh, or that you're proud of. And everyone had to get up. What was great is you're sitting at your desk all day. Imagine, picture like 30 people just all jumping up from their desk on Zoom and racing around, scrambling. I said, the only thing is it can't be a picture of your family. It's got to be something else. And people brought in certificate, bowling trophies and the fly fishing stuff. And, so it was just great. And it gave, again, helped people to connect and bond over common interests, or you learn something about someone. Oh, I never knew that about you, right? So I brought my high school English award from 1980. People are like, oh, there's this little plaque that I still have available. So again, or doing something like 2 truths and a lie. There's all kinds of team bonding things you can do. But again, it makes it fun. One of my clients did something I thought was really innovative that I loved. They just sent everyone an email saying, what's your shoe size, at the beginning of the pandemic? And people were like, why? Like, just send us your shoe size. Everyone got a pair of company branded slippers. So when they were at work at their desk, they would wear the slippers, but when they were not working, they were like, take the slippers off. So that was the way of, because so often we felt like at the beginning of the pandemic, you were working there was no off switch. There was no getting to work or leaving work. It was like you were at work at home all the time. So symbolically, when you were wearing the slippers, you were in that mindset of, okay, I'm at work, but now I'm on a break or I'm going to lunch. Take the slippers off. So I just love that. Another company did something similar with those rubber wristbands, like put it on when you're working, take it off when you're not. And one of my clients that I did a workshop for was the American Cancer Society. I did a pro bono workshop for them. And one of the issues was funding for cancer research dropped dramatically because so much of funding was directed towards COVID, right? So they would sit at their desk and they would kind of like lose sight of the mission of what they were there for. So what the company did, I did a visual thinking exercise around the American Cancer Society's organizational logo. It's something that they saw every day, but never really thought about. And then what the company did is they made little versions of those flags and sent it out to everyone. So it was sitting on their desk. So when you were sitting at your desk, you never lost sight of what the mission was, what the purpose. Just because COVID was the hot topic, that doesn't mean that cancer went away. Right? So we needed to keep our eyes on the prize, stay focused on fundraising and cancer awareness. So that little flag on your desk reminded you with that sense of pride and ownership, this is what we're here for. We're literally saving lives every day. We're not just logging on. So that's a key point, is like, how do you keep the mission and the vision and the core values front and center as part of your culture, and not lose sight of that even when you're at home. So I love that. Those are just a few examples of things that people are doing to help keep that culture conversation and build that sense of community and camaraderie, even when you're virtual.
Yeah, I love those. I want to change directions again. I don't know much about, I've done some cursory research, but you do have, it's actually a registered trademark, visual leadership. So the visual leadership approach, could you please educate us on it a bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So visual leadership is my registered trademark, so it's my brand. The trademark office had rejected it twice. The third time they finally approved it. I guess we wore them down. So visual leadership is spelled with one word with a single shared capital L. And the idea behind visual leadership as a word and as a brand, and it's also the title of my book, Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life, is the fact that who you are and how you lead is inseparable from the lens through which you see the world. So your background, your upbringing, your schooling, your culture, your life experiences all shape what you see and how you see the world, but also what you miss, what you don't see, what we're blind to, right? So visual leadership is my central metaphor, and that comes out of my years of working in the entertainment industry, and which is so much about storytelling and visualization and creating imagery and that type of thing. And also when we talk about leadership, we talk about vision. Right? What is your, so-and-so is a visionary leader, or what is your leadership vision? Martin Luther King Jr., for example, said, I have a dream. He didn't say I have a spreadsheet or a business plan. He said, I have a dream. I have a picture in my mind's eye of a future state that's different from and better than the current reality. So visual leadership is all about how do you get people to see what you're saying? First of all, how do you get an idea out of your head and into other people's heads? And then secondly, how do you make that vision a reality? So I'll talk more about it in just a second, but On the cover of my book is a rainbow-colored eye, and the rainbow-colored eye represents diversity and inclusion and reminds us of the fact that no one in the world sees the world exactly as we do. So, and the other aspect is, with all the colors of the rainbow and all the colors of the crayon box, we need to be innovative and creative in terms of how we create a vision that's compelling and inspiring, and then how do we bring that vision to life so that we could change people and also change the world. So that's just from the cover and the title. Those are some of the central points of what visual leadership's all about.
Are there? I love it. Are there any that you'd like to go deeper on? I for one would like to hear more about. We all have our biases and we're looking through our own lenses. Is there anything that you can suggest so we can reach up and kind of turn that lens a little bit to refine the focus?
Yes, I love that. Focus is a great word that ties into visual leadership, right? So, think about this. Picture a telescope and a microscope. As a leader, sometimes we need to look through a telescope, look far and wide, right? Other times, as a manager, we need to look down and deep. So think about that. Sometimes you're looking out into the future and beyond the horizon, and other times we need to get down into the detail. So the ability to do both is one of the important traits of a leader. Sometimes we use a magnifying glass. Sometimes we see things through rose-colored glasses. Sometimes we're looking at things with blinders on. So those are just a few metaphors that relate to visual thinking. In terms of the visual leadership methodologies, I break them down, and I do workshops and webinars on this. I just did one yesterday for the Association for Corporate Executive Coaches on visual coaching. How do we use visuals in a coaching context? But for all leaders, for all people, I break it down to 4 categories. One is using visual imagery and or drawing. So pictures, props, demonstrations, anything that can be seen with the physical eye. So a map, a storyboard, a picture of something, a prop, all of those things are a use of visual imagery. A napkin sketch, a whiteboard drawing, sketching something out. When people say a picture's worth 1,000 words, or I'll see it when I believe it, those are all mantras of category 1, which is using visual imagery and or drawing. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks, which is like a company's organizational chart or a map or a process diagram or a storyboard or anything where you create some kind of structure or put things into boxes. We always talk about thinking outside the box, but you can't think outside the box, which has become a cliche, but it's still true, until you have a box and things in it, right? So if you put things into categories and use frameworks, you can see things more clearly and find solutions that you might not otherwise have seen with the complexity and the messiness of life. Category 3 is using metaphors and analogies like that. I use a lot of baseball analogies, so I'm a big baseball fan. That idea came out of left field, or that presentation was a home run, and you really struck out with that idea. We use metaphors all the time, and those are just the tip of the iceberg. But we use all kinds of metaphors to explain things, and metaphors make the invisible visible by using color and creativity to paint a picture with words. And category 4 is using storytelling and visual storytelling specifically, which is about getting an idea out of your head, almost as if you're creating a mental movie in someone's mind's eye. And Shakespeare coined the term mind's eye in Hamlet when Hamlet saw the ghost of his father and didn't know if it was a figment of his imagination or a real apparition. We have images and pictures in our mind's eye all the time. How effective are you as a leader of getting that vision out of your head and into the heads of your followers and turning those followers into leaders? So those are just a few of the concepts of my book. And those are the 4 sections, and each section has around 10 or 15 real life examples of how I've used these as management leadership tools.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I really look forward to cracking the book. Anything else you'd like to cover about the concept?
Yeah, just a few stories. I'll just open up at random. So one of my questions that's a metaphorical question for leaders is, what is your leadership weather report? Are you a cloud of doom and gloom, or a ray of sunshine who lights up a room, even on Zoom? So I added the Zoom part after the pandemic. But think about that. You can't, as a leader, you can't control certain external realities like the weather, but the climate you create within your team or organization is completely within your control. And there are some leaders, when they walk into a room, either in reality or metaphorically, where it's like hell froze over, right? It's like everyone puts their head down, oh, so-and-so's here. And there's other leaders, they walk in and they just inspire and energize people. So are you the type of leader who energizes people or sucks the energy out of them? So just if you think about that, and people always expand on that, that metaphor of like, the thunder and, this manager was really thunder and lightning, or this one was a real cyclone, or a hurricane. And someone else was like a calming ray of sunshine in the morning at daybreak, right? So like, think about the weather you create, think about the impact you have on other people. So that's just one of many metaphors in the book. One of the stories I tell is how my cardiologist almost gave me a heart attack, which is about how, as leaders, we very often bore people to death or mislead them with numbers. So I often say, we overuse numbers in the business world because numbers are meaningless outside of their context and the story they tell. So I've seen leaders get up and deliver really boring town hall presentations of, and this went up by 2.479% over the last quarter, and people's heads are just nodding, as opposed to telling a story. And the story behind the cardiologist was, I went to the cardiologist, he walked in and he said, based on your numbers, after going through all the tests, you have a 5% chance of having a heart attack within the next 10 years. And I almost got weak in the knees and passed out until I said, wait a minute, does that mean that there's a 95% chance that I won't have a heart attack within the next 10 years? He said, yeah, that's another way of looking at it. Yeah, your numbers are great and you're in perfect shape for a guy your age. It's like, couldn't you have said that when you walked in the door, as opposed to scaring the heck out of me, right? So the data he gave was it incorrect? No. But was that the message he wanted to send? Not at all, right? So think about that from a leadership perspective, how often we either bore people or mislead them with data and statistics, as opposed to getting our message across. Because the whole point of that was changing behavior or basically putting people's minds at ease or inspiring them. And we just basically bore people to death with numbers all the time. So that's one of the key ahas that a lot of leaders take away is how to use numbers more effectively.
Thank you for that. I love it. And I have to tell you, I got to respond. I have a similar story related to heart attacks. Okay. So when I was an executive in a publicly traded company, the board of directors 1 year early 2000s, decided they wanted all the top 5, named executive officers to go to this executive physical every year, and that they would pay for it. So we went. It was an all-day physical, Todd. It was great. I loved it. They picked you apart and treadmill test and cognitive, and loved it. About the second year I went, this doctor, who was is a nationally renowned longevity doctor. I don't think this guy's ever eaten a Snickers bar in his life. He lives it, looks 30 years younger than he is. I get all these tests done, and I'm in the wrap up with him, and he looks at me deadly serious. Now I'm still fairly young. I'm really fit, exercise. And he looks at me dead serious across the desk and says, if you listen to me and do everything I advise you to do, we can reduce your risk of heart attack by 50%. And I'm like, oh my God. That implies to me that I'm at risk. Yeah. He said, you need to do this and do that. And I had the presence of mind after a few minutes to say, doctor, can you answer me a question here? What is my risk of having a heart attack right now? And he said, 1.6% chance of having a heart attack or a heart-related event over the next 10 years. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I'm all about optimizing here. But, the way you addressed it, I thought I was at like 80% clogged. Mike, you're ready to drop over right now, So it made me chuckle because I had a similar. And so I learned with that guy, because he's all about optimization. I learned to ask him very specific, detail-focused questions in the future. Because I'll tell you, for a brief few minutes, my life was flashing in front of me. I'm like, I think I've done most things right. I'm getting ready to keel over.
So you know what that's like to be on the receiving end of that. But that's a big point for leaders too, right? It's like you can have technical proficiency, but what's your bedside manner, right? Are you putting even like, let's say your numbers weren't great for the last quarter, fiscally for your company. Is it doom and gloom, or do you paint a picture of, hope and optimism? And hey, we're going to ride out the storm. Here's why it went down, but here's what we could do to bounce back. So it's like, how do you frame the situation? And part of being a leader is building hope and optimism in your people, even in the toughest of times, and helping people to navigate the tough times. And so if you're just stuck on the numbers, you're losing an opportunity to say, hey, what does success look like? How do you measure success? What's on our dashboard? Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, but you also need to lead it as well. So you can't just manage by statistics. You need to interpret those statistics, interpret for your people, what is the story it's telling, and how do we create a better story, because the future is unwritten, right? So a lot of it is how we frame things. Another story from my book that really relates to leaders is, I had mentioned earlier, my dream was to work in the TV industry. So when I grew up in New York, I moved to LA when I was 24, and my parents dropped me off at the airport. I said goodbye to them because I didn't know when I was coming back to New York. And I got on the plane to head out to LA with no money, my resumes packed in my bags and a few $100s. I didn't know anyone out there, anyone in the TV industry. But my dream was to work for NBC. That was like that was like my network growing up and everything else. So I'm getting on the plane. I'm walking through first class to get to my seat all the way in the back and coach. And then there's a guy blocking the aisle. And I say, excuse me, can I get through here? And he turns around, and it's Grant Tinker, who is the president of NBC. So here I am on the plane moving out to LA with a dream of working for NBC, and the CEO of NBC, who is also Mary Tyler Moore's husband previously, was on the plane. And the whole flight I was sitting there, and even though I talk loud and fast because I'm from New York, I'm an extreme introvert. I'm a 3Bs guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm by nature. So for me to even think of getting up and talking to this guy was so out of my comfort zone. But for the first 4 hours of the flight, I couldn't even eat the really bad airline meal because I was so focused on Grant Tinker's on the plane with me. So about an hour before we were going to land, I kept going up to the first class curtain and turning around and going back to my seat. So after doing that for like 2 or 3 hours, I finally got up the courage. I walked through first class. I said, excuse me, Mr. Tinker, can I talk to you for a second? I said, I interned at NBC this summer before, which I did. And I said, I'm moving out to LA. My dream is to work for NBC. Do you have any advice for me? And he was sitting in the aisle seat. And I thought he was just going to call the stewardess or flight attendant to kick me out of first class. But what did he do? He got up from his aisle seat, moved over to the window seat and said, sure, have a seat. I'm Grant Tinker. Nice to meet you. And he spent 15 minutes talking to me. And I'll never forget that. You talk about servant leadership. You talk about humility and grace. Because here I was bothering him. He didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And yet he took 15 minutes out of his time to give me some advice. And he even gave me his business card. He said, I probably won't be able to meet with you, but call my secretary, tell her how we met, and then she'll set up some meetings for you, and which she did. And I ended up not getting a job at NBC. I got another job somewhere else. But there's so many lessons there, and I tell that story in my book, is that, first of all, it took all the courage in the world for me to actually do that. But secondly, look at the impact. I'm still telling this story 30 years later, right? Yeah. So the impact of a leader, and Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, he once said that the words we say to someone, we may forget 2 minutes later, but may linger with them for the rest of their lives. And this is the kind of example of leadership that he took 15 minutes out of his busy time of reading or whatever, or being alone on the flight, and yet gave that time to a young kid who was looking for just some inspiration and some advice. And that's why I try to pay it forward whenever anyone asks me, a student, anyone, even some of the students who are not my students in my class, want to pick my brain or ask for advice. If I can, I always say yes. And I always channel Grant Tinker all these years later. So I love that story just because, again, there's so many lessons there that linger with me all these years later.
Well, it's a great story. I love it. And I think that anyone that's been around a while certainly has those memories of someone that had an act of kindness and all that. And I know you'll agree, Todd, that, once we become the Grant Tinker level, right, that's a very loose analogy comparison, but it's incumbent upon us to put our paper down and talk to that kid for 15 minutes. Yeah. Because chances are he or she, whether or not you could really help him or not, he'll never forget it. She will remember it for the rest of her life. And it's like a family raising children that will propagate itself through the generations, hopefully, you know.
Yeah. And my 4G's philosophy are be genuine, so be yourself, be generous as much as you can, be grateful for what you have, and have grace, and realize that none of us are perfect, and so I always had be genuine and be generous. And then my friends Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick wrote a book called Leading with Gratitude. So I added the G for gratitude. And then my friend John Baldoni, colleague of mine, he wrote a book called Grace, which is on the shelf behind me. And that put the idea of grace in my mind as well. So I expanded my 2 Gs to 3 Gs and ultimately to 4 Gs. If everyone practices those spirits of genuineness, generosity, gratitude, and grace, I think the world would be a better place. And that even rhymes. So there you go. There's my poetry major coming in handy right there.
Yeah. Great comment. Well, listen, our time has come to an end, but I can't let you out of here, Todd, without asking you the mystery question I ask of all guests. If you were able to bring back one leader from the past for a day and resurrect that person, spend a day with them, who would it be and why?
Wow, I was not prepared for that question. That's a tough question. The first person that popped into my mind was Abe Lincoln. Just because there's so much complexity in his life and his viewpoints, how he changed, how he saved the nation. I mean, there's so many things there. So there are other people too, but I think he's my answer of like one person that I would like to meet and really connect with. And he was a big reader, as I am. I'm obsessed with reading. So so Abe Lincoln would be my answer.
That's a great choice. It's actually a frequent choice.
That's why I was trying to go with someone infrequent, but it was the first person who came to my mind.
Yeah, I love Abe Lincoln. And obviously of what he put up with during the Civil War and going through generals and all of that. And I was a high school and collegiate wrestler, and Abe Lincoln was a wrestler. And I, being a bit of a smartass, I think I could have flipped him, but I don't think I have the same gravitas to be the president like he did. The guy had the patience of Job, really did. And it's my belief, when you hear presidents talk of both major parties, Republicans and Democrats, many of them, despite party differences, look to him with great reverence as a role model of how to be a president. And it's obviously easier said than done, to be an Abe Lincoln.
Yeah. And when you're a kid, you put presidents on this pedestal. And as you grow older, you realize how human they are and with faults and human frailties. And that's what makes them even greater, is when you recognize the fact that they were not perfect people. And these were not superheroes or comic book characters like Superman or Batman. These are real people with character flaws and other things who had to do, great things in tough times.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, how can people buy your book? And if someone wants to reach out and connect with you, how do they do that?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. The best way is go to my website, Todd Cherches, and it's CHERCHES, toddcherches.com. There you can see my TED Talk, and you can find out more about my book. And you can also sign up for my email list. My book's available anywhere, including Amazon. And I live on LinkedIn. So just connect with me on LinkedIn. Say you saw me on Mike Vittori's show, and we'll connect and continue the conversation on LinkedIn.
Got it. Well, Todd, it's been great. Can't thank you enough for your investment in time. It's been I don't know if you've seen me. I've been taking notes the whole time. So it's been a great episode. I've learned a lot, and I knew I would. I can't wait to crack your book. And I
love your book as well. The trust-based leadership. Trust to me is center to really every relationship and every person. It's like without trust, you have nothing. So I love your philosophy and your approach to leadership.
Thank you so much. Well, listen, I really would like to put you on the spot and ask you if you consider coming back again someday for another episode.
I would be honored.
All right, Todd. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Heracles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.